In the summer of 1944, the German High Command believed that steel was the only language the world understood, until the world stopped speaking and started calculating. General Johannes Blaskowitz does not see a landscape. He sees a geometry of survival. Outside his command tent, the morning mist clings to a column of Panther G tanks. To Blaskowitz, these are not mere vehicles. They are mobile fortresses. The math is comforting. 44.8 metric tons of Krupp steel, 80 of frontal armor, sloped at a precise angle to yield an effective thickness that defies the standard 75 Allied rounds. He looks at the 7.5 cm KWK 42L 70 gun barrels. They are long, deadly, capable of piercing 111 of plate from a distance of 1 kilometer. Blaskowitz operates on the great man theory of engineering. He believes the superior machine, guided by the superior will, dictates the terms of reality. He surveys the 3.27-meter height of his Panthers. They tower over the hedgerows. They are monuments to German physical law. But across the line, the Allied perspective is different. The Americans do not care about the soul of the Panther. They do not care about the craftsmanship of the Maybach HL-230 engine. To the Allied system, Blaskowitz is not a legendary commander. He is a data point, a set of 6-digit grid coordinates on a fire control map. While the general calculates his breakthrough, a faceless technician miles away adjusts a brass dial. The Allies have stopped trying to outbuild the tank. They have decided to outprocess the target. Blaskowitz checks his watch. He feels the ground vibrate. He assumes it is the power of his own engine. He is wrong. He has exactly 60 seconds to realize that his invincible math is about to be solved by a higher power, the arithmetic of high explosives. The equation is changing. The variables are in the air. The equation is changing. The variables are in the air. Time, 08:14 hours. A low rumble rolls over the Mortain ridgeline. To Blaskowitz, it sounds like distant thunder. It is actually the sound of M105 howitzers firing from batteries over 10 kilometers away. The general looks at his lead Panther. Its 690 HP Maybach engine is idling, vibrating with a rhythmic mechanical pride. Then the 60-second window begins. The Allies are not aiming at a tank. They are saturating a grid. This is time on target taut. It is a synchronized execution. Dozens of shells are timed to arrive at the exact same second. The math is cold. The math is absolute. At T-minus 30 seconds, the air screams. At T-minus 0, the logic of German engineering meets the physics of massed industrial fire. A 44.8 metric ton Panther does not just explode. It moves. The ground, compressed by the tank's 12.5 psi ground pressure, suddenly liquefies under the concussive force of simultaneous high explosive impacts. Blaskowitz watches, frozen. The 3.27-meter height of the Panther, the very thing that gave it battlefield presence, now provides the surface area for a vertical displacement. The tank is caught in a vacuum of overpressure. For one impossible second, the pinnacle of Krupp engineering is airborne. It is a physical impossibility rendered real by the Allied system. The tank does not return to the earth as a weapon. It returns as a scrap heap. While the official record remains silent on the exact height of the displacement, the implications suggest a force so violent it bypassed the armor entirely. The general's solved equation has just been deleted. His tanks are not being outfought. They are being unmade by a mechanical formula they cannot see. Blaskowitz realizes the terrifying truth. You cannot duel a factory. You can only be erased by its output. Now, he must understand how the Allies turned steel into a liquid state. Blaskowitz realizes the terrifying truth. You cannot duel a factory. You can only be erased by its output. Now he must understand how the Allies turned steel into a liquid state. To understand the fall, one must look at the pride of the build. The Panther was not a vehicle. It was a steel cathedral. The German philosophy was simple: superiority through complexity. Every Panther carried 18.5 tons of face-hardened steel in its chassis alone. This was not mere iron. It was a metallurgical masterpiece designed to shatter incoming Allied 75 mm 76 mm projectiles on impact. Underneath the hull sat the Schachtelaufwerk, the overlapping road wheel system. It was a mechanical nightmare of double torsion bars. It gave the gunner a platform so stable he could hit a target at 2 kilometers while moving. It was smooth. It was precise. It was arrogant, but the German system was fragile. To even engage the enemy, the Maybach engine demanded a 15-minute warm-up procedure. Precision requires patience. In the artisan workshops of the Reich, German engineers spent 3,000 man-hours per unit, hand-fitting components with the care of watchmakers. They believed that quality could defy the gravity of numbers. The Allies, however, were not building watches. They were building a meat grinder. While a German crew struggled to replace a single interior road wheel, a task requiring the removal of 5 others, the Allied system was already shipping standardized crates of parts across the Atlantic. The Germans built for the duel, the Allies built for the campaign. Blaskowitz's invincibility was rooted in a fatal flaw: the belief that a machine that is hard to kill is the same as a machine that is easy to maintain. Technically unverified but part of veteran lore, it was said that more Panthers were abandoned due to a broken torsion bar than were ever destroyed by a Sherman's gun. The Cathedral was beautiful, but it was stationary, and in a war of motion, a masterpiece that cannot move is just an expensive target for a map coordinate. The Germans had perfected the tank, but they had forgotten the fortress. The Germans had perfected the tank, but they had forgotten the fortress. The Third Reich was obsessed with the immovable. From the concrete teeth of the Atlantic Wall to the 120 thick gun mantlets of their heavy tank hunters, the doctrine was clear: mass equals immunity. If you make the steel thick enough, the enemy ceases to exist. This was the delusion of the static. Each Panther represented 3,000 man-hours of labor. It was a staggering investment of national soul. But this invincibility came with a logistical tax that the German High Command refused to acknowledge. The Panther was a glutton. It devoured fuel at a rate of 0.85 gallons per mile. In the mud of France, that number spiked. Blaskowitz viewed his Panthers as anchors of a front line that could never be moved. He relied on the 18.5 tons of specialized armor to negate Allied movement. He believed a fortress could be mobile. The Allied system viewed it differently. To the planners in London and Washington, a fortress isn't an obstacle. It is a fixed variable in a demolition equation. They didn't see a masterpiece of engineering. They saw a logistics problem. A tank that burns a gallon of fuel every mile is a tank that is tethered to a supply line. A tank that takes 3,000 hours to build is a tank that cannot be replaced. The Allies stopped trying to out-armor the fortress. They decided to bypass it, starve it, and eventually delete the map square it sat on. While historians still debate the counterfactuals of whether a simplified German design could have turned the tide, the industrial reality was already set. The Germans were playing a game of chess, protecting their king pieces. The Allies were playing a game of Tetris, clearing the board with sheer volume. Blaskowitz's fortresses were heavy. They were thick, they were lethal, but they were about to face a weapon that didn't care about armor thickness. It was time to introduce the system, a faceless process that viewed a 45-ton tank as nothing more than a chemical reaction waiting to happen. The fortress was about to become an oven. The fortress was about to become an oven. The Allies did not bring a better tank to Mortain. They brought a better clock. Enter the M101-105 howitzer. On its own, a single shell is a threat. Massed, it is a geological event. The system functioned through the M1 graphical firing table. This was not the intuition of a great captain. It was a slide rule execution. Allied fire direction centers treated the French countryside as a Cartesian plane. Blaskowitz's elite division was reduced to a set of 4-digit number. The doctrine was time on target tot. The math was exquisite. A battery at 5,000 meters fires. Seconds later, a battery at 11,270 meters. The M101's maximum effective range unleashes its volley. The SCR-584 radar control and precise meteorological data allow technicians to calculate shell flight time down to the millisecond. The goal: total atmospheric displacement. By staggering the firing times, every single high-explosive projectile arrives at the same coordinate at the same instant. There is no warning, no bracketing shots, just a sudden violent transition from silence to erasure. The Allied system transformed the battlefield into a factory floor of falling steel. They did not target the Panther's 120-gun mantlet. They targeted the air around it. They targeted the ground beneath it. Technically unverified but part of veteran lore, it was whispered that the TOT strikes were so precise they could create a localized vacuum, suffocating crews before the shrapnel even reached the hull. The official record remains silent on the biological specifics, but the physics suggest a nightmare. Blaskowitz's men looked to the horizon for an enemy they could shoot. They found nothing. The enemy was a math problem being solved by a man in a tent 11 kilometers away. The steel cathedral was built to withstand a hit. It was never designed to survive a calculation. The steel cathedral was built to withstand a hit. It was never designed to survive a calculation. The Allied system understood a fundamental law of physics that the German High Command ignored. Armor is only as strong as the medium it sits upon. To defeat the 44.8 metric ton Panther, the Allies didn't just use kinetic energy. They used chemistry. Enter the incendiaries. White phosphorus WP. When a 105 WP shell detonates, it creates a 5,000-degree thermal bloom. It does not need to penetrate the 18.5 tons of face-hardened steel. It simply seeks the air intakes of the Maybach engine. It starves the crew of oxygen and melts the rubber seals of the vision blocks. But the system went further. Early experiments with gelled fuel, the precursor to napalm, transformed the battlefield into a pressurized furnace. The Allied 105 high-explosive shells, with their specific density designed for maximum ground shock, created an overpressure threshold of 20 psi. This is the insignificant fact that broke the German line. At 20 psi, the external pressure exceeds the structural integrity of the Panther's internal fuel line. The tank doesn't need to be hit by a shell to be destroyed. It merely needs to exist within the radius of the vacuum. The pressure wave hits. The fuel lines rupture. The 690 HP engine becomes a bomb. Blaskowitz's invincible walls are now an oven. While historians still debate the counterfactuals of whether specialized German ventilation could have mitigated this, the chemical reality of 1944 was absolute. The Allies treated the German tank as a volatile compound. They didn't fight the Panther. They triggered its instability. As the ground liquefied and the air burned, the German general watched his mathematical certainty vanish into a cloud of white smoke and screaming metal. He realized that the Allies weren't just killing his soldiers. They were rewriting the laws of the battlefield. The era of the king of the battlefield was over. The era of the factory as a weapon had begun. But how did the Allies produce enough chemistry to drown a continent? The answer lay not in the lab, but on the assembly line. But how did the Allies produce enough chemistry to drown a continent? The answer lay not in the lab, but on the assembly line. In 1944, the German Reich was building masterpieces. The Allies were building a deluge. The Panther was a boutique weapon. It was artisan crafted. This was its glory and its death warrant. To the U.S. Ordnance Department, a tank was not a work of art. It was a consumer good. They enforced the interchangeable parts mandate. Every bolt, every gear, every 75 mm3 gun tube had to fit every chassis coming off the line in Detroit or Philadelphia. The numbers are a cold hammer. The Reich struggled to push out 200 Panthers a month. In that same window, the Allied industrial machine was vomiting forth 4,000 M4 Sherman. For every 44.8 metric ton Panther Blaskowitz deployed, the system could afford to lose 20 Shermans and still have a numerical advantage. Losing a Panther was a tragedy of lost man-hours and irreplaceable steel. Losing a Sherman was a rounding error. The maintenance gap was even wider. The Panther's complex drivetrain required constant, expert intervention. The The Sherman was built for a 2,000-mile maintenance interval. It was designed to be repaired by a farm boy with a wrench in a muddy not a specialist in a factory. The Allied system viewed the war as a logistics flow. They didn't see the Panther as a superior fighter. They saw it as a bottleneck. While historians still debate the counterfactuals of what a simplified German standard Panzer could have achieved, the reality was already decided by the assembly line clock. The Sherman was good enough in numbers that made perfect irrelevant. Blaskowitz looked at his tanks and saw the pinnacle of quality. He failed to realize that quality is a ghost when quantity becomes a physical force. He was fighting a war of knights. The Allies were conducting a war of shipping manifests, but even a mountain of steel is useless if it cannot reach the front. The Allies hadn't just mastered the building of the machine, they had mastered the moving of it. The factory was coming for Blaskowitz, and it was traveling at 60 miles per hour. The factory was coming for Blaskowitz, and it was traveling at 60 miles per hour. The German war machine moved by rail and hoof. It was a 19th century heartbeat inside a 20th century body. When the tracks were blown, the horses died. When the horses died, the 44.8 metric ton Panthers became static museum pieces. The Allied system moved on rubber. Enter the Red Ball Express, a relentless conveyor belt of GMC CCKW 2.5 ton trucks, famously known as the Jimmy, carrying up to 5 tons of payload on paved roads. While the Germans waited for specialized flatbed railcars to move their heavy armor, the Allies were treating the French highway system as a high-speed assembly line extension. The system had a singular goal: throughput. Standardized shipping crates allowed a replacement engine or a 75-gun tube to travel from a warehouse in Ohio to a frontline repair depot in Normandy without a single custom fitting. The result was a 24-hour repair turnaround. An Allied tank killed on Monday was back as a coordinate on Tuesday. To protect this flow, the Allies utilized the 12.7 mm2 Browning machine gun. It was ubiquitous. It was versatile. It stripped the soft German supply lines to the bone. While a Panther's armor could deflect a 12.7 round, the horses, trucks, and fuel bladders feeding it could not. The official record remains silent on the exact psychological toll of the Red Ball Express, but the implications suggest a total collapse of German tactical hope. Blaskowitz was fighting for a single hill. The Allies were fighting for the entire continent's transit capacity. The Germans relied on the brilliance of the individual mechanic. The Allies relied on the redundancy of the Jimmy. Blaskowitz finally understood the disparity. He was a man holding a shield against a tidal wave. He had the better armor, but the enemy had the better schedule. And now, the schedule was calling for the final destruction of the German logic. The steel cathedral was about to face the one thing no engineer could factor into the blueprints. The moment the mind of the soldier snaps under the weight of the math, the steel cathedral was about to face the one thing no engineer could factor into the blueprints. The moment the mind of the soldier snaps under the weight of the math. Blaskowitz stands in the shadow of a giant, but the giant is screaming. Inside the 44.8 metric ton Panther, the physics of protection have turned traitor. The general realizes his fundamental error. Armor doesn't have to break to kill. The Allied system has weaponized the metallurgy of the Reich. As the war progressed, the brinal hardness ratings of German steel became erratic. To compensate for a lack of molybdenum, the armor was made harder but more brittle. The result is spalling. An Allied 75-105 Michel slams into the frontal glacis. It does not penetrate the 18.5 tons of outer casing. Instead, it sends a shockwave through the plate. Because of the high carbon brittleness, the inner face of the armor shatters. It sprays the interior with jagged scabs of steel traveling at supersonic speed. The crew is shredded by their own protection. Then comes the HESH effect, high explosive squash head. Even without a breach, the concussive energy creates an overpressure that turns the interior into a pressure cooker. The internal temperature during a brew-up can flash spike to over 1,000 degrees Celsius, igniting the 7.5 cm propellant charges in seconds. The system, doesn't need to aim for a weak spot. It simply hits the coordinate with enough kinetic mass to trigger a structural suicide. Technically unverified but part of veteran lore, it was said that German crews began to fear the clang of a non-penetrating hit more than the silence of a kill. The official record remains silent on the exact rate of desertion due to spalling, but the implications suggest a total psychological breakdown. Blaskowitz looks at his invincible column. He sees the thickest armor in the world, but he finally understands. The thicker the wall, the more shards it creates when the system strikes it. The machine is intact. The men inside are liquid. German logic has reached its terminal point. The invincible shield has become a lethal trap. Now the hunters become the hunted as the Allied system prepares to unleash its most humiliating calculation. German logic has reached its terminal point. The invincible shield has become a lethal trap. Now the hunters become the hunted as the Allied system prepares to unleash its most humiliating calculation. In the lore of the Ardennes, there is a ghost story that haunts the German Panzerwaffe. It is the story of St. Vith, where the system proved that even a giant can be felled by a needle. Enter the M8 Greyhound. It is a 7.8-ton reconnaissance vehicle. It has no right to be on the same map as a German heavy tank. Its armor is thin. Its silhouette is small, but its 55 mph top speed offers a variable the German fortress cannot compute: agility. The legend claims a lone M8 encountered a 68-ton Tiger II. While historians still debate the counterfactuals of the St. Vith Greyhound, the story serves as the ultimate psychological weapon. The Greyhound allegedly used its speed to close the distance, maneuvering into the one blind spot the German masterpiece couldn't protect. The Greyhound's weapon was the 37 mm 6 gun. To a Panther or a Tiger's frontal glacis, it is a pea shooter. But the 25 mm rear armor of the German heavy tanks is a different math problem. At point-blank range, the 37 rounds supposedly punctured the engine vent, turning the 690 HP power plant into a pyre. Technically unverified but part of veteran lore, the story of the Greyhound that bit the Tiger represents the moment the Allies stopped fearing the monster and started treating it as a mechanical target with a specific, exploitable flaw. The Allied system didn't need a 70-ton counterweight. They just needed a fast-moving platform that could place a small-caliber round into a weak coordinate. The official record remains silent on the exact kill count of the M8 against heavy armor, but the implications suggest that German invincibility was now a joke told in Allied motor pools. The fear was gone. The myth was dead. Blaskowitz's men were no longer the apex predators. They were slow, thirsty targets waiting for a faster world to outrun them. The arithmetic of the battlefield was moving toward a final terminal sum. The machines were failing. The factories were winning. It was time for the final tally. Blaskowitz's men were no longer the apex predators. They were slow, thirsty targets waiting for a faster world to outrun them. The arithmetic of the battlefield was moving toward a final terminal sum. The machines were failing. The factories were winning. It was time for the final tally. General Blaskowitz looks at his situation maps and sees a ghost army. He has ace commanders with 100 kills each. He has tanks that weigh 44.8 metric tons of theoretically superior engineering. It does not matter. The Allied system has outproduced the concept of individual heroism. The system is a logistical meat grinder. Total Allied steel production has reached a scale the Axis cannot even graph. While German strategic bombing failed to dent the assembly lines in Detroit, Allied raids on Schweinfurt's ball-bearing plants crippled the German drivetrain industry at the source. A tank without bearings is a stationary bunker. The arithmetic is brutal. The Allies can replace an entire lost armored division in 7 days. For the Reich, losing a division is a permanent amputation. The human cost is even more clinical. By the final months, the average lifespan of a late-war German tank crew in combat has plummeted to a mere 11 minutes. The system doesn't need aces. It needs throughput. It treats the battlefield as a conveyor belt. It feeds 75 shells and teenage conscripts into the machine until the German logic jam, while historians still debate the counterfactuals of the wonder weapons. Wunderwaffen. The clock has already struck midnight. Blaskowitz realizes the war wasn't lost on the hills of Mortain. It was lost in the furnace. It was lost in the 3,000 man-hours it took to build one Panther while the Allies built 20 Sherman. The German quality was a boutique luxury. The Allied quantity was a physical law. The general stands in a silent the thunder he hears now isn't his own gun. It is the sound of an industrial civilization dismantling a medieval dream. The tally is complete. The result is 0. But the ghost of that 45-ton tank, suspended in the air for 60 seconds, still has one final lesson for the future of war. The tally is complete. The result is 0. But the ghost of that 45-ton tank, suspended in the air for 60 seconds, still has one final lesson for the future of war. In the 1945 post-war assessment of Operation Totalize, Allied analysts didn't look for heroes. They looked at data. They confirmed what Blaskowitz realized in his final minute. The era of the nightly duel was dead. The 44.8 metric ton Panther, for all its aim of sloped perfection, was a relic of a failed logic. It was a weapon built for a war that no longer existed. The Airborne Panther at Mortain was the birth cry of the system's era. Modern warfare moved away from the boutique, heavy tank and toward the main battle tank MBT. The lesson was simple. Balance the math. Reliability, throughput, and networking became the new armor. The system evolved from brass slide rules to computerized fire control system. Today, a target isn't just a coordinate. It is a digital packet in a global network, processed at speeds that make Blaskowitz's 60-second realization look like an eternity. The Allies proved that you don't win by building a better sword. You win by building a better forge. The transition was absolute. We no longer celebrate the craftsmanship of the individual plate. We calculate the efficiency of the 120 smoothbore and the satellite link. While historians still debate the counterfactuals of whether high-tech quality can ever defeat overwhelming quantity in the digital age, the shadow of 1944 looms large. The system won. It is still winning. Blaskowitz's 45-ton masterpiece didn't just fall back to Earth. It crashed into the future. It left behind a world where wars are won in the office of the logistics officer, long before the first shot is ever fired. The math is settled, the machine is silent, but the calculation never ends.